Okay, it's time to introduce our awesome panelists and our moderator, Shelby from Instacart. Come on up. And I'm going to let you introduce the panelists.
Okay, I'm using...
Oh, you've got your own mic.
Yeah,
all right,
okay.
I'll just wave her.
Okay, awesome. Well, so for those of you that don't know me, I'm Shelby Wolpa. I am Director of HR at Instacart. Yeah! Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. I appreciate Udemy for giving me these cards and organizing this awesome event. You know, we're talking about a number of topics tonight, and all of them have the potential to be, you know, increasingly important to us as HR leaders over the next 3 to 5 years. So we're kind of, you know, things are moving so fast that we're really trying to even contain the scope of what we're talking about just to the next 3 to 5 years, because things are just moving so quickly in some of the topics. And our awesome panelists will, you know, share their insights throughout the night. A couple of quick housekeeping items. We are going to do a formal Q&A at the event at the end of the talk. So if you could hold your questions to the end. And then also, we are filming. So you guys are all on camera. And Udemy is going to be sending out the video for all of us after the event. So without further ado, can I have my awesome panelists come up here and join me? Okay, so to kick things off, if each of you we can go down the row, starting with Steve, and each have you introduce yourself and tell the group, the company you work for, and a little bit about your background.
All right. I'm Steve McElfresh, and I'm the Vice President of People at New Relic. New Relic is a application monitoring firm. Most of you, unless you're developers, wouldn't know of us, but for the 17 million people who create websites or mobile apps, we help them run their websites and mobile apps. In fact, we have more customers doing that than all of the other application performance management firms in the world. Been around for about 7 years as a company, and I've got a long history in HR, which I won't bore anybody with because it would take a long time. But I'm delighted to be here, and I'm excited.
And I am Jason McPherson. I'm from CultureAmp. We're a co-sponsor of tonight's event. We're a software culture analytics platform for people and culture, for people geeks. That's people operations people to use data and technology to better understand their people and culture. I'm the chief scientist there. I don't have a lab coat on tonight. And I'm Australian. I've only just started the English accent reduction course. But yeah, if you have any trouble, put your hands up and I can adjust my accent a little bit, but not too much. People Geek t-shirts, I just want to mention we've got a whole pile of them at the back. So if you want to be a people geek, go to the back, grab some t-shirts, and yeah, I hope you enjoy the event. It's so great to see you all here.
Yay. Yay, Jason. I'm Sheila Ryan. I'm head of HR at Glu Mobile. You may have heard of us, maybe not because of Deer Hunter, but perhaps the Kim Kardashian mobile game. We do mobile gaming and we do free to play. So we were the first to lead into that. And shockingly, we are actually a public company. We've been public for about 6 years now. But what I would call us is a late stage startup or a public startup. They were hanging on by their teeth, basically, for many years. And so the infrastructure, especially HR, as we've all seen in the past, was not invested in. And over the last year and a half, they have decided to invest in that. And so I've actually been there 6 months, and I'm starting to try and rebuild what we want to offer at the company.
Oh, hi. I'm David, VP of HR and Recruiting at Zendesk. And where's my Zendesk people? So, yes. All right, so we are a kind of customer engagement, customer support tool. Like when you're going home tonight and you do your 5-star review on Uber, that's us powering that sort of customer tool. And I apologize in advance for totally disrupting the flow of tonight when we get to the performance part of the conversation. So
Noted.
Back to you, Shelby.
Noted. All right. Great. So to kick things off, I want to pose a question to each of you. It's apparent to all of us that so much is changing in the world of HR very fast. I'd love to hear each of your perspectives on things that have changed over the last few years. Who'd like to kick it off?
I'll kick it off.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, many people might know we're an Australian company, but we work with over 100 new technology companies here in the Bay Area. And we've been working with companies here for the last 3 or 4 years, so we've seen a lot of change over that time, just in that small amount of time. I think the one thing we noticed straight away was it's not called HR anymore sometimes. Well, it's called people ops, people and culture, a lot of different terms for it now. And so there's often lively debate about what we call that function. I think it's healthy that we're even just talking about it and thinking about it rather than finding the perfect name for it, which we probably won't ever do. The other thing is that we're seeing people in culture and people ops use more platforms and tools. So it's less getting a service provider or getting someone else to do things for us. It's using platforms and tools and becoming people geeks who are able to do things ourselves with the platforms and tools. And there are so many more available now as well. I think that feeds into the next one. We're seeing smaller companies start to do that. So smaller companies can do what previously only much larger companies with much larger resources could do. And that is helping those companies scale faster, learn faster, etc. So that's the other trend that we're seeing very much.
One of the things I notice is the real-time nature of business. It's, everything moves now. If we're not ready to make offers today, if we're not ready to address benefit questions today, if we're not ready to be available to our people in Australia now, we're failing. There's an expectation that everything is going to move. A silly example perhaps, we have our major development center in Portland, and we have a couple of folks elsewhere in the world who do some very specialized work with them. And those two people have cubes in Portland. I don't mean they have places they can hotel when they come in. I mean they have cubes, and if you go by, you can see this cube's about this wide, and they'll be there on Skype, and there'll be pictures of their family and the scores in the local soccer team from where they are in Queensland or in Cape Town, and they work our hours. And because the issues and decisions happen now. People have a meeting. So let's go talk to Wilmer. Wilmer is in this little cube, available, because that's how things move. So just the astonishing pace and the readiness to be able to make decisions quickly and fastly, for me is wonderfully exciting, but also incredibly challenging.
Is Wilmer a real person?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Not the real name, but sometimes called that.
I think one of the things, though, is you're not hearing, we need a seat at the table. That what drove me nuts. And now it's like, hurry up, get here. We want you, we need you. And that's a big difference, as well as not just people operations and people in culture, but people in places. I think finally the organization has realized that the environment has a lot to do with the culture in the organization and how people work. That's what I've seen change.
I think Glassdoor is a huge change for employers. So Glassdoor is the Yelp for employers. There was not a Yelp before there was a Yelp. Now there's a Yelp for employers. And so your exit interviews are basically public, and so do you even need to do exit interviews anymore? The whole veil has been lifted on what it's actually like to work at your employer, and it's all in one place. Whereas previously it was kind of like a myth and a mystery and all that sort of stuff, and now it's pretty much transparent.
Cool. Thank you, guys. Cool. So, Jason, I'm going to direct this next question over to you because I'm sure this is top of mind. It's regarding people analytics. So, you mentioned this, but I'd hope you can elaborate on it now. Companies are increasingly collecting data on their employees around engagement and satisfaction and happiness. How are companies using this data now, and then how do you anticipate them using it in the future? And then, what benchmarks do you anticipate being the most meaningful to companies?
Yeah, a couple of easy ones. So anyone who, we're talking about benchmarks all the time. I'll come to that as part of this. A couple of things observations I'd make about people analytics. And Stephen Huang, who's just joined us, had a similar kind of feeling about this. We learn a lot about very advanced analytics, and there's conferences where we're doing really, really fancy things. But for most companies, the balance is actually being able to get a basic thing in place. So, you need to sort of learn to use a compass before you get a GPS out type thing. And a lot of companies just need some direction and get good at collecting that data and making it part of what they do. And building trust around that as well. So a lot of companies, you run ahead with advanced analytics. Okay, we need this data, and you forget that you're getting that data from people. And it doesn't matter if you've got really great data, but you've broken the trust of the people you're collecting that data from, then it's all going to break down as far as I'm concerned. So for me, it's getting that balance right and thinking about that with predictive analytics and people analytics. Benchmarks, again, I think the issue with benchmarks is around balance. So we have this year we put out a new tech benchmark report. It's from over 100 new tech companies. That's important because it's not, previously you would have had tech benchmarks that have sort of electronics manufacturing, or that would be considered tech. But you probably need something closer to the technology that we're talking about, which is online. So getting that sort of broad industry categorization is right, but then not overdoing it. We don't need a benchmark for companies on Brannan Street with more than 2 table tennis tables type thing. And sometimes that process can lead you too far down that path. So I think with benchmarks, it's about getting that balance right. If you get too specific, they become they jump around a lot, and you'll be chasing a moving target if you try to get too specific with benchmarks. You want them robust and reasonably, in your right industry. And it's important to think that the marketplace is not the same marketplace as your customers. It's where would your employees go, or where will your employees come from, and where will they come from in the future as well, as your organisation grows and changes. So,
Great. Anything to add?
Yeah, I'd make a couple observations on people analytics. One, just so you know, I was CEO of Saratoga Institute, for any of you know Saratoga Institute, for a while, and thought a lot and worked with a lot of really big companies around data and data analytics. And I've walked into some Fortune 100 companies that have these big, reporting systems and mechanisms. And I always ask one basic question. I'd ask this whether you're a company of 50 or a company of 50,000, and that is, does your data drive decisions? And if your data doesn't, or will it drive decisions? Is there any kind of data that would come out of this that is going to drive a decision to action? And if there's not, why are we doing this? What is this about? And like I said, I've been in lots of companies where they gather data because they could gather data, and they reported on it, and they thought people could look at it and be amazed by them. And I thought, no, this is not impressive. So data drives decisions. The other thing I would suggest and leave with you is that people think of data as primarily either big survey tools or HRIS, and we're going to go inquire of all. And I don't have that. My company is too small. And I really think the magic here is not about whether you've got those measurements, but whether you think analytically, whether you approach the world from the point of view when somebody comes in and says, we've really got to have a leadership program around here. Instead of, and by the way, I did this 30 years ago, instead of going to the shelf and saying, oh, okay, I have this great leadership program. We'll go, and it'll, instead saying, what's the problem we're trying to solve? How big a problem is it? In what groups? What's it cost us to not solve it? What's the upside of solving it? If we did this with some part of our company but not all of it, is that going to get us 90% of the way there? And thinking through that in what amounts to a quantitative analytic estimation process is immensely powerful. And nothing I said had to do with measuring anything. It had to do with going inquiring in the HRS. And I'm just astonished by the degree to which we don't do that. It can be quite powerful by thinking analytically about how we approach our work.
Well, I think that's what's going to come out, though, is that there's so much data now that we can connect those things that we know that are soft. I told one of my friends out here that I would use as an example. He was able to prove that one-on-ones had a real impact on their optional, what did he call it? I can't remember, optional sick time. Jeremy, help me out. But when you have that moment where we all know that they're important, and now you have data to show that people took the sick time who didn't have managers who were having quality one-on-ones with them. We know there's a lot of things that we preach to our people, but we can't quite say it because it's soft skills. And I think with the amount of data we're able to collect now, we're going to have correlations out there that we never had before. Thank you, Jeremy.
I just have to mention a correlation, because they're sometimes not the direction we want. We did a study with a company where they had this online performance appraisal system, so we could actually measure how long the appraisals were, how detailed they were. So we looked at that in relation to engagement scores, and there was a correlation, and it was negative. Anyway, so lots can be said about that, which I won't say now, but looking for how do things connect and now we got to figure out how to make sense of that. And particularly those surprises are incredibly valuable.
Yeah, they're the most fun, the negative correlations.
Absolutely. They are. I mean, it's where you say, oh, we can do something, because it drives decisions. Sorry.
Cool. So I'm going to make a not obvious pivot over to performance reviews now. This is David's big moment. Don't blow it. Just kidding. So there's been a ton of debate and innovation in the areas of performance reviews. I'm sure this is top of mind for anybody thinking about mid-years or any of those things that are coming up. So curious to hear from the panel, starting with David, what your philosophy is around performance reviews and changes in the near future.
Okay, I got 3 bold predictions on the future of performance.
Let's hear it.
And I'm going to swing for the fences here. How much do I have? Like 30 minutes? Okay. So pay for performance is a philosophy I think that like a lot of, particularly public companies, say that they have. And pay for performance is dead. Pay for performance is obsolete. Here's why. So the origin of pay for performance is in this idea called piecework, which is a concept from 1549 AD, where you get, X cheese by producing Y widgets, right? And so this is a concept as old as the Industrial Revolution, but we still think it's like novel and kind of cool and interesting. And so there's increasing amounts of academic research that when you apply pay for performance in a cognitive skills setting, it has the completely reverse effect on performance. And so anything other than like cognitive skill, like physical skill, it makes sense, but cognitive skill, it doesn't make sense. So why do we keep using it? Why do we keep saying like, oh, we believe in pay for performance? Well, for a lot of the companies here, maybe you're still pre-IPO. Like what happens is as you go IPO, like you have a comp committee that forms and the shareholders ask you, what's your comp philosophy? It's actually a requirement of a comp committee to have a comp philosophy. And you just say, we believe in pay for performance. And then you keep it going, like we believe in pay for performance. And like that's why it perpetuates. And it's ridiculous. And so pay for performance would imply that as stock goes up or stock goes down, like pay goes up or down. But the reality is, and this is the Equilar study, there's no correlation at the executive level on stock return and executive pay. So why do we keep saying it? So what really motivates people? What really motivates people is like Daniel Pink, Daniel Pink, so autonomy, mastery, and purpose. We know it. Like engagement is what motivates people. And so like the interesting thing is like why do we keep saying pay for performance? I think pay performance dies, and instead we have like engage for performance. Like we try and solve this engagement for performance issue. And the problem is all our tools right now are about comp and performance and marrying the two. What's the rating and what's the person's pay increase and vice versa. So that brings me to my second point, and I have 30 minutes left. So my second point is performance and engagement tools will merge, right? So all the sort of, like success factors, Workday, all these different tools that you have right now, it's all about trying to understand the rating and apply that to the comp and then vice versa. I think that the future is like understanding engagement and performance. The manager wants to know what is happening in my team on engagement because that's their motivation. I want to apply that to the conversation. I want to understand engagement and apply that to performance conversation and vice versa. And so that's just not happening right now. The data lives on surveys, on engagement surveys. It lives elsewhere. On performance, it lives in a different tool. Like, those will merge. So that's not, I don't think that's controversial. My last point, third point, which may be controversial, the biggest innovation on performance management is going to be about text analysis. So write down text analysis. This is what I think is like kind of the future. So probably a few of us in here are like, we're trying to think about how do we make performance reviews easier for managers? Maybe it's about mobile, maybe it's about like a button you push and just like boom, boom, boom. Like, so I think that's kind of like a total panacea, like red herring. I think that's all about limiting inputs, but you want to maximize outputs, right? So we're ignoring the big problem, which is like, how do you make the output of a performance review process like really meaningful? And so I think what happens is you ask your managers and the 360 inputs and the self-reviews to do all this sort of like, write how you think you're doing, and there's this like mountain of text data that you have. And what do you do with that? And so like maybe you put it into a word cloud, but that's not super innovative. Like the federal government right now, and there's a controversy, like the federal government has tools to read mass amounts of text data right now to do sentiment analysis and to basically tell you what's happening in this mass amount of text data. We in HR, we're going to use that. We're going to apply this awesome computational linguistics, like machine learning technology, and bring it into performance reviews so that as a manager, now you have performance review stuff and you have engagement stuff all in one place, and the manager goes in and they see what's going on. They see what's going on, not only in a team, like what am I doing to mess up my team's like motivation and performance, but also what are people saying, and now I have this like basically the words are parsed. For me as a manager, I get to go have the conversation, that's the meaningful thing, like this is so refreshing. The outputs are exceeding the inputs. And I think that's the thing that we're going to like all glom onto. There's one company out there right now. It's called Kanjoya. It's a business application platform. They're using this analysis, sentiment analysis, to essentially apply, like linguistic sort of kind of interpretation to what's going on in engagement. And I think that will go into performance reviews. Sorry. All right, that was long. I'm done.
Yeah. Anything else to add?
I can add some data to this. So one of the things we frequently have is the timing of your survey, right? And one of the things that we commonly hear is people, we can't do a survey because we have to do it before the performance review, right? Because everyone's going to be disengaged after the performance review. And you know what? It's actually the other way around. So when we've surveyed people, they've quickly done one to get in before the performance review. The performance review is like the single most demotivating event of your work year. And just thinking about it makes you 10% less engaged. So it doesn't help to survey before the performance review. It actually makes it worse in a lot of cases. So.
So are you saying do away with performance reviews?
I am.
Oh my gosh, whoa, crazy sound.
I hate 'em.
Let's
Go for it.
Okay, let's do away with performance reviews.
Yeah,
Okay, now what would you do? Like, what would you do in lieu of performance reviews?
nothing.
What do you
I'm
mean
just
do
kidding.
nothing? That's crazy.
I think you need to drive a culture of having conversations about moving forward. Yes, you look at the past for indications of what you need to do to improve, but if you need people to perform, and if we all agree that most people in your company are there to perform and good employees, then how do you help them get there? How do you keep going and driving forward instead of, oh, you sucked here, you sucked there, and by the way, here's your raise. Oops, it's not much.
Right.
That's what I think happens, and people get all wrapped up in the score because somehow we have to talk to a finance committee, the CFO, and explain why we gave someone 2.5 instead of 2.2%. And I don't like them. I don't think they do their job that we think they're doing. They're not driving the business
So
forward.
let me push you a little bit more.
Okay.
So I still don't understand, what do you do in lieu of performance reviews? Culture of feedback, like I totally get that. Like, what do you do?
Well, one, you make sure that you have the feedback around your product and everything, that you talk. Well, maybe you would use some of that linguistic stuff so you could get regular daily feedback.
I'm not selling anything, by the way. I have no product to sell.
But you have to go multiple layer, though. I mean, you
Yeah.
can't just say, then that's what happens with performance reviews. You're doing a one-hit wonder instead of creating that in the organization. Do you do regular feedback on your product? Do you have a culture where when you guys meet, you go through your projects and your production and what's going on and really evaluate it and make it so that feedback is valued and you act on it? And that goes from the top to the bottom and back up again. So you have to have the leadership be fully engaged in that they want to hear feedback. And half the time this doesn't happen very well because your CEO is the one who doesn't do any of his performance reviews. So it loses from there.
I'm my CEO.
Not my CEO.
So let me suggest a little different angle, which is, David, I think your question about what do we do with performance reviews is the wrong question, because it presumes performance reviews are an end in themselves.
I'm so pissed that you called me out like that.
Yep. Good. We're going to write your review a little later, so don't, hold on to that. But I mean, imagine a world without performance reviews. I don't mean that we should or shouldn't. I think we have to remember what we're really doing. We're productivity engineers. Our goal should be, how do we enhance the effectiveness and productivity of our organization? I don't know for sure where performance reviews sit in that for you in your organization. Maybe for some, I mean, for instance, our salespeople, we do some performance reviews, but frankly, they're reviewed at the end of every week, and the end of every month, and the end of every quarter, and we talk to them, and we love them to death, but there's not much question about their performance, and they make it or they don't make it. I think we've got to think about what is it that enhances the effectiveness of our organization? How do we grow people's capabilities, productivity, and engagement? And then say, is there something that looks like a performance review that fits into that, and how does it fit into it? It's not an end in itself. We're not bad HR people because there isn't something that looks like a typical performance review going on. It either serves a purpose or not. And having done the analysis in a couple of organizations about the effectiveness of various HR practices, it is generally negatively correlated with engagement and commitment to the job. And it's just bizarre we keep doing it. Anyway, so.
I think it goes back to, we didn't have data before, and that was the only thing we could show as data as to what we did, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, here we go. Here's our bell curve, which has been proven to be wrong as well. And so we've just held on to the bastion of, well, that's what HR does.
But we got to ask, what are we really trying to accomplish? And that may be something we do with performance reviews. It may not. I don't know. But we better accomplish that productivity goal.
Great. Thank you for the lively debate.
Can we talk about this for like 3 more minutes? No? Okay.
I love your passion, by the way.
Okay.
David is available after for questions and comments. Great. So switching gears again, this topic I think will be particularly interesting to Matt Caldwell, man in the back. So we're talking about transforming recruiting. So this is particularly interesting to us at Instacart, and I'm sure to many of you as well. There's a rise in different types of workers. So contractors, contingent workers becoming a very normal part of business. And curious to hear your thoughts on that trend as the rise of contingent workers increases, as well as how, when you're thinking about people and onboarding and integrating everyone into the company and then being engaged, and how that may change given the different status of people. And I think Steve and Sheila were particularly interested in this topic.
Well, I've been tempted to rename our talent acquisition function as labor supply chain. Because I know it's not sexy, but I think we have a choice. Those of us who run HR organizations, we have a choice of do we work with employees, which is one population that is, by the way, most organizations shrinking as a percentage of the people who do productive work, or do we become experts in the supply of labor? And by the when we look at materials supply chain experts, they ask, for instance, buy, borrow, make questions. We've got this thing we need. Do we buy it? Like hire somebody. Do we borrow it? Lease somebody. Do we make it? That is, retread people or build the capability within the organization. And thinking systematically about what are the trade-offs of each of those, and how do where do we do which, and how do we apply it? I think there's a huge world out there that is this sort of Lego structure of pulling. We've got a development team in Guadalajara who are not employees, but for certain purposes they work with us as employees. We have fulfillment people in other parts of the world who are not employees, but for some purposes we work with them as employees. And we, in a here we got a choice. Do we take leadership in that whole supply chain and making rational decisions about it, or do we say, oh no, we work with employees? In which case we work with the ever shrinking part of the productive elements of our organization, which may be okay. So one observation.
I think I would define it differently because I think the average lifespan of an employee coming up in the millennials is 2 years. In the Valley, it's 1.5 years. I think it's an old notion that employees are with you forever. I think that our contractors, now I'm not looking at sort of hiring a whole team for a particular project, but when we have contractors, temps, they're a part of our organization, and you need to inculcate them and make them a part of the organization. So how they're paid and how the government looks at them is very different than how you look at them. Because I think this is more government mandated. We put them through onboarding, we have them as a part of the organization, and if I kept putting them out like we're forced to by the Department of Labor, it's not gonna help us reach our goals. So I think we gotta look at it a little differently.
I don't really know the answer to this question. I just remember in a prior life, there was like an all-hands meeting that was being called, and the HR team was asked to distinguish between like red and blue badges and make sure the blue badges weren't in the audience of like 1,000 people. And I was like, fuck that noise. Like, we're not gonna do that shit. Like, sorry.
Boom.
Like, that was just like, you don't want to be in that policing, you don't want to be like that policing, and let alone like getting into the international environment, like where you grow, like when you have like, we need like 3 employees in Guadalajara or Guatemala, like, you actually like, that's your foray, is getting into an environment where you actually have like contract labor. And so I think another sort of prior experience was we were trying to apply a parental leave globally. And we were trying to apply it in a sense that like it didn't discriminate between moms and dads, biological and non-biological, and didn't discriminate between contract and non-contract labor. And so we asked ourselves, what would happen if we just said this applies to all our contract labor? And like we were small enough to basically say, let's just take the risk. Let's just like not try and distinguish. And like the outcome of that was that there was no impact to the company. We applied it to like all employees globally. We actually had most of our staff internationally was contract, and we made it work. So
Great. Cool. So switching gears, this is, I think, our last official question. Talking about learning and development. So I know that the Udemy team shared some really useful insights earlier in the presentation, and shared that opportunities for growth and development are seen as one of the key drivers of engagement. So curious to hear from the panel. We'll start with you, Steve, on what you think the future learning environment will look like for companies.
Well, I mean, some seems so obvious, but I'll say it anyway, and that is this incredible flexibility of we're now putting together a whole series of curricula around various certifications and specialties, and it takes like a day, 2 days, whether it's Udemy or other resources. There's this immense richness, which then can be delivered real time to people when they need it, as opposed to, okay, we're going to have a class on, this big debate about whether or not we pay for their class when it goes overtime. It's all delivered to them when they need it, where they need it, and they take it in pieces. And of course, we know if they've done it or not, or at least whether they had it turned on. Maybe the dog was looking at it while he ate, but nonetheless, we've got some idea what's going on with that interaction, and it's just incredibly flexible for us to pull in resources, make them available in a very thoughtful and systematic way, and then people can grapple with it on a real-time, as-needed personal basis. And it's very exciting. I mean, I think there's still a purpose for the classroom, and I'm trying to figure out what it is. No, I do think there's a purpose, but it's a much smaller purpose than it used to be.
Yeah. Curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, sure. So learning and development, it's so important that it's probably the most consistent driver of engagement. It just won't go away. Every now and then I check the algorithms in our platform because I feel like something's got jammed because it's always in there, and no, it's not. It's happening every time. And there are other unique things with that learning development. I can't recall the last time I saw data that showed that it wasn't a driver in an organization. And that happens in organizations where previously they say, hey, it's not about learning and development. We have contractors, we have retail, these people aren't here for learning and development, but you know what? They are. And it frequently surprises me sometimes, and it surprises clients that we work with. What's going to happen in the future? Well, I guess everyone knows now that it was important before, but everyone knows now that your job is not guaranteed for life. And the only way to have a guaranteed position in which you can have gainful employment of any type is to keep your skills and your development going. And I think that's well appreciated. However, one thing that has changed, and it will continue to change, is it's less about do I have a career at the organisation. It's about how can I contribute to the development that I'm going to make in this organisation, and how am I going to develop some mastery in some of the things that David talked about in this organisation. Is this going to be a great place for me to spend a reasonable portion of my life? And we need to get more lateral about that. So we need to, and it needs to be driven by the individuals. So it needs to be more tailored. So there are things to help you do that, and people need to buy into that. It's not something that, it'll increasingly not be something that HR or people ops won't provide learning and development to people. All we can do is try to speed up what those people were already wanting to do. And I think we're going to have to be a bit innovative with that type of thing and think sideways. We've kind of looked at implementing things in our organisation. We're not very big, but we're starting to think about it already. Things where we pair people up to learn skills that they have identified from an identified coach in the organisation. And that you give someone a call. I'm learning software architecture from one of our developers. I've got goals. They're my coach. They set my homework. It's also a great way to work with people in your organisation. There's lots of things, and I know that other companies are doing those types of things, and I think that's the type of thing that will happen in the future.
Awesome. Great. So to kind of close things out, I'd love if each of you could share one final takeaway, one tip, one tool, something that the audience can learn from and take with them in their journey.
I hate to pander to our sponsors, but for me, the absolutely essential message is to never stop learning, to never, ever stop retreading, reorganizing, learning. You mentioned the shortness of careers; they're getting shorter. And forgive me if you've sat in some of my speeches before, but I tell people that there are two kinds of people in the workforce. There are people who are in transition, and there are people who are in denial. Because everybody's in transition. I mean, we all are. And so if you're not constantly learning, and by the way, just so you know, I believe what I say. I got at some point, I can't believe it, 3 college degrees, 2 of them working at night. They're doing it at night school. Happily, you don't have to do that because there's so many other ways to learn today. But I just think, those of you who are 25 and think you own the world, and you do, when you're 35, there's going to be somebody who's 25 who is going to knock your socks off because they're going to know so much more. And you just never, ever, ever can give up.
Yeah, I'd probably extend that I think now in people and culture, we need to get our hands dirty and learn things, learn how to use tools, learn how to use platforms, and learn how to learn text analysis. Do something.
That's right.
Yeah.
Programming.
Yeah. It'll help you interact with your organisations better and build a broader language for yourself as well, I think. So that's probably my tip.
To stay on this theme, I think that what you're doing here, you need to keep coming out because the world is moving faster than we can, and you've got to try and stay ahead of it and hear what's going on. In HR, we have to be flexible because our workforce is changing, the world around us is changing, and so making connections with fellow HR folks who are trying to make a difference and staying on top of the trends and actually helping to lead some of them. But these kinds of events and keeping your knowledge up is what's really important, I think.
Can I swear? Can I curse?
I'm going to stop you.
So, shit, I did already. So my favorite all-time HR metric, so Saratoga Institute. So Saratoga Institute did a study, 19,000 exit interviews. They looked at why the person left. They basically went to the exit interview, and they also talked to the person, and they talked to the manager. They talked to the manager, and they mapped up, why do you think the person left? And then they talked to the person, why did you leave your job? 89% of employers, i.e. the manager, believed the person left for more money. And the reality is, when you ask the person, 12% of people leave for more money. And what is actually the dominoes that fall ahead of that are, am I learning? Do I like my manager? Am I growing? Do I like the team? Do I believe in the product? So that's, when you said Saratoga Institute, I had to throw out my favorite all-time HR metric.
Awesome. Well, let's give our panelists a round of applause. Cool. So I'd like to open up the floor for questions. Any questions from the audience? Yes. Hey.
Hi, Shelby. So my question is on the pay for performance. I love Dan Pink. I think that the autonomy mastery purpose really sort of shined the light on this reverse correlation. It was great, right? But there's also this need for fairness. And there's this need that if I have 1x impact versus 10x impact versus 100x impact, that should show in my pay.
Yeah.
So how do you balance that? If I could get like a solutions-focused answer on the push and pull between these two things.
Yeah. Who wants to answer? You want? Go ahead. Should I take it first? Oh, thanks. All right. So, yeah, it totally makes sense. It's like, you want to know that you're paid fairly. And so if you're a higher performer, you want to know that kind of bears out in your pay. But I think to get to fairness, the way I kind of talk about with our team is let's win the battle of fairness. Let's not win the arms race. Let's not just pay everyone at the 90th percentile, but let's win the fairness battle. Fairness battle is performance, but it's market, it's internal and external market, it's what you're doing in your job, it's what your own pay history is. And so it's actually it's multiple inputs. And so when you talk to someone about, hey, you're paid X, to just say you got a 5 rating and then you got a 5% increase versus a 4% increase, that obviously that doesn't do much for you if you're hearing that, right? And so you look like you want to say one more thing.
Right, so how do you take that impact and in a systems focus while you're scaling and everything, somehow take that impact and translate it into comp? I think that's the $1 million question, right? Without making it a pay for performance situation.
I mean, I don't have the easiest answer for you other than to say that your compensation, multiple factors are involved, right? But to say that it's pay for performance is totally disingenuous. But to say that your comp is it involves internal, external market. Here's how we made this decision. We had a lot of different data inputs. I'm probably not going to articulate in the best way, but other than to say that it involves a lot of different inputs, and to say otherwise that it involves one input is kind of disingenuous. Anyone else want to add to that?
Well, just a couple things. As much as I'm loath to agree with you, David, I would agree with you. Something you said before about the difference between, if you will, mechanical, physical effort and intellectual effort. There's some things that really can be pay for performance. I mean, if I could figure out how to rig up to have dollar bills come out when our salespeople hang up on some calls, I probably would. And they want to know exactly where they are in terms of that pay cycle. On the other hand, with our very best and most creative engineers, they want to know that they're paid reasonably for that. But what they really want is, respect. They want the opportunity to patent something and get their name on it. They want the opportunity to present at professional conferences. And I think if you get really caught up in, we got to treat everybody as pay performance in that sort of literal sense that we might do with the salespeople, we really undermine. In fact, one of my earlier careers was a social psychologist teaching School of Management, and there was a study I love to talk about where, with kids, this was 9-year-old kids, and 2 separate populations take a dozen classes of each, and they're doing poetry. And so you take one of these groups of kids and you say, for every poem you produce, you're going to get 25 cents. And another group you say, we're going to talk about poetry, and I want to have everybody read their poetry aloud in class. And, son of a gun, unsurprisingly, at the end of 6 months, the kids who are paid 25 cents wrote more poetry, right? They're like our salespeople. That's great. The question is, who's writing more poetry in a year when they stop giving 25 cents? The kids who didn't get any money. Unquestionably and overwhelmingly, they're the ones who are producing more poetry. That is to say that intellectual production is driven by a whole lot of things that in fact can be undermined by being too literal about pay for performance.
Who wrote better poetry?
Well, the ones who are writing no poetry did not write better poetry.
Do you have some poetry that you want to recite?
Oh, thank you for asking.
Well, and with the 3% budget, it's really hard to pay for performance as well.
I think you want to remove comp from their concern, right? Like, so you want to remove, like, everyone, like, in general, like, as a professional kind of cognitive skill employee, they want to do really well. They might have a comp concern. It might be internal fairness, like perceived, like, unfairness. You want to remove that from the table, and so you want to understand, like, what is the barrier to, like, you feeling as though you're paid fairly. And sometimes it's a question that you ask, like, what is, like, kind of for you, like, what do you feel like? Netflix has an interesting model. It's like, what do you want more cash? Do you want more equity? Do you want more bonus? And they actually let you kind of decide what is the right pay mix. What I understand, they kind of like let you kind of decide, influence your pay mix, which I think is really interesting. So it's kind of like making the conversation as opposed to like, I have a solution for you. It's kind of interesting.
Great. Any other questions? In the back?
I don't know if there's a mic. Hey. I'm Jason. I'm on the analytics team, or people analytics team at Uber. Stephen, this actually came from something you said about people in this room are all productivity engineers. We're trying to maximize the productivity of our employees outside of the realm of performance reviews. You know, if we're going to throw it out the window, what's the best way to measure productivity? Because that's a big question we're asking ourselves right now.
Oh, I guess you're asking me. I guess I queued that up, so I should answer. I don't know. I mean, I really don't know. The question I ask, and you know, when you want to measure anything, productivity in your case, anything, you know, everybody will tell me, oh, you can't measure that. You can't measure, you know, the degree of coherence in the group, and you can't measure productivity for people who do, you know, cognitive work. So what I start with, you know, in sort of working people through the thought exercise is, tell me about where you know it's there and where it's not. Just describe those circumstances. Tell me about the people who you know are more productive, even if you can't tell me how you're measuring or what it is. And tell me about the people who are less productive. And then we just sort of dig into what is it we're actually seeing. The difficulty, and you usually can get to some pretty good answers there. The difficulty is when productivity is highly variable. You know, it just depends on, you know, what's going on at that moment. There's some unique jobs like that. For most jobs, I get people to tell me stories that describe what they observe as high and low productivity that they tell me they can't measure, but as we dig into it, we find out that there are observables, and it doesn't mean it's easy to measure, but there's something in there that we can get to that is much more than they think, and it all comes from them. It's a great thing, by the way, about being a consultant is you ask a lot of questions and let people give you the answers, and then you tell them back their answers and get paid for it. It's really a wonderful business to be in.
Great. Yes.
Thank you. Without using a 1 to 5 measurement, how do you measure culture or the positivity or health of a culture? Engagement, you know. Is that clear?
When you say without a 1 to 5, you mean without a survey or? Without
saying on a scale of 1 to 5, how would you measure this company's culture?
I go 1 to 10.
What do you break it down into? How do you report back on that? What is your data around culture?
I'll just say kind of what our team talks about is, in general, what you're trying to do is any sort of like global HR and recruiting team is you're trying to attract, motivate, and retain the talent that you need to win in your space, whatever that space is. And so the kind of culture space is that motivation, is that middle one, the motivation. And so that can be NPS, or that can be intent to stay. I think intent to stay is really interesting. Thinking about like when you ask in CultureAmp or in any sort of kind of engagement survey, do you plan to stay for the next year? What's really interesting is that like if you did that and you mapped it to your actual voluntary attrition numbers, there's a correlation. Like when people say, I'm either going to stay or I'm not going to stay in the next year, they're pretty much telling you the truth. And so when I think about sort of engagement, I think about motivation. NPS and intent to stay is like tip of the iceberg. And then underneath that, there's an assortment of things about learning and kind of manager competency. And what do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm curious to make sure I get the question right as well, which is, how are there other things you can do to measure what could be called engagement without doing, a survey type approach? Is that a good understanding of the question?
Yes, and that culture is 2014 word of the year.
Yeah.
Webster dictionary.
Yeah.
Right? How are we tracking
Yeah, well, Steve and I were talking about some examples of other ways to tap into how strong your culture is. I'll borrow Steve's example as well, so I'll actually steal his answer ahead of it. Well, there are other things you can measure. Say, things like all hands, they can be recorded. Some people, attend in person. So how many people attend? How many people actually go back every week and watch it? And how many people don't even log on or touch it? There's other things, in our organisation we have, whenever we're doing something, we have people want to provide feedback and input into what we're doing. I think if culture breaks down, people won't want to put input into that. That could be measured as number of comments on a wiki page about something we're about to do. I mean, I think there are other things that we can measure that would be measures of culture as well, and we maybe have to get creative with that and look at what things in our organisations could measure that. They could later be tracked against a survey or some other type of measurement, an interesting exercise, and can help you tailor the other things that you're measuring. So yeah, that's a couple of thoughts.
Okay, great.
Sorry,
We're going to take one final question. Man in the white shirt.
Let's just keep it going. Everyone wants to.
Thank you.
I think everybody wants to drink.
I've spent most of my career in the common benefit space, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you I'm a proponent of performance reviews. But having said that, you have a quantum. Okay, and the quandary is I have a limited pool that I have to disperse to a limited number of people, and I need a way to disperse that pool. I also need something that's simple enough for managers to deal with in a very small slice of time. So what are you going to replace a performance review or some kind of ranking? The other comment is when we talk about pay for performance, it's not necessarily individual performance. It's company performance, it's relative performance, it's ranking. It's not simply your performance review is 3, so that means you get this increase, or if it's 5, you get this increase. Depends on how you stand with relation to the market. That does not negate the fact that you pay for performance and use that as the basis of your compensation system. So you need something to replace something that's been used, that's imperfect. Everybody admits it's imperfect, but you got to replace it with something.
Yeah.
Well, you're trying to put an objective on a subjective process. It's still the manager making the decision. You already know who is your top performer. You know where the efforts have been placed. You're just looking for justification for what you're doing.
That's always been
Preach.
Yeah.
Preach. By the way, I didn't say we're doing the performance reviews. I personally said that paper for performance goes away.
I said reviews go away.
You said reviews go away. Thank you.
Because I don't like written reviews.
I disagree with her. Reviews stay. It's just a different thing that you're doing.
I don't like the written review. I think
written review blows up, and I think we do text analysis, and I think we have computational
so we'll
linguistics.
spy on you.
I think reviews stay.
Okay, well, thank you guys so much.
We'll be backstage talking
Yes.
about this.
I want to take one more moment to thank the Udemy and CultureAmp teams for putting on this awesome event. I know there were some hands still, raised. I'm sure some great questions. Our panelists will be kind of roaming around after the event if you want to come and find them. And feel free, the bar is going to stay open for a little bit, and so feel free to continue networking, and it was awesome to see all of you tonight. Thank you.